The sound of wagon wheels grinding against gravel broke the silence of the Montana wilderness as Eleanor Blackwood clutched her worn leather journal to her chest. Her heart pounded against her ribs like a trapped bird seeking freedom. 6 days of travel had left her exhausted, her simple brown dress wrinkled despite her best efforts to remain presentable. As the stagecoach approached Silverwater Creek, she carefully adjusted the silk scarf that partially covered the left side of her face, a habit born of necessity rather than vanity. "Silverwater Creek coming up, folks," the driver called out. "Last stop before Whitefish Pass." Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. Silverwater Creek, the name that had danced through her dreams for months, ever since the first letter had arrived at her aunt's cramped Philadelphia boarding house. She removed the envelope from her journal, folded and unfolded so many times the creases had begun to tear, and traced her finger over the careful penmanship of Jackson Montgomery, cattle rancher, and her soon-to-be husband. The other passengers, a merchant and his wife, regarded her with barely disguised curiosity. "First time in Montana territory, miss?" the woman asked, straightening her expensive hat. "Yes, ma'am," Eleanor replied, her voice soft but steady. "My fiancé is waiting for me." The word still felt foreign on her tongue. Fiancé, a man she had never met, but had exchanged 14 heartfelt letters with over the past 5 months. All alone, so far from home, but finally moving toward a future that promised stability and perhaps even happiness. "Well, good luck to you, dear," the woman said, her tone suggesting Eleanor would need it. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." Eleanor stepped down from the stagecoach, her small valise in one hand, while the other instinctively reached to ensure her scarf remained in place. The October wind cut through her thin coat as she took in her first glimpse of Silverwater Creek, Montana. The town was smaller than she had imagined, a single thoroughfare lined with wooden buildings bearing the raw look of frontier construction. A general store, a saloon, a small church with a wooden steeple, and a livery stable. Men in dusty clothes moved about their business, eyeing the newly arrived stagecoach with mild interest. Eleanor stood alone as the Montana sun beat down, searching the faces for Jackson Montgomery. His letters had described him as tall, with dark hair and a beard, but that description could fit half the men in town. "You lost, miss?" A young boy of perhaps 12 approached, munching on an apple. "Stage don't come through often. You meeting someone?" "Yes," Eleanor replied, trying to keep the nervousness from her voice. "Mr. Jackson Montgomery. Do you know him?" The boy's eyes widened slightly. "Mr. Montgomery? Sure do. His ranch is about 5 miles outside town. You want me to fetch him for—" He comes on Thursdays for supplies." "Today is Thursday," Eleanor said, her pulse quickening. "Is he here now?" The boy nodded. "Saw him at Miller's store about an hour ago." He squinted down the street. "That's him there, coming out of the post office." Eleanor followed his gaze and her breath caught. A man was emerging from a shop down the street, tall and broad-shouldered in a worn duster coat. Even from this distance, she could see he matched the description from the letters: dark hair and beard, both lightened in places by the sun, and a purposeful way of moving that suggested confidence. "Thank you," she whispered to the boy, who shrugged and scampered off. Eleanor smoothed her dress with trembling hands and picked up her valise. This was the moment she had traveled over 2,000 miles for, the beginning of her new life. She took a deep breath and began walking toward him, her gait steady but her heart racing. Jackson Montgomery was examining a package when he sensed someone approaching. He looked up, his expression initially neutral, then questioning, as he saw Eleanor walking directly toward him. "Mr. Montgomery?" Her voice was miraculously steady, despite the riot of nerves in her stomach. "Yes?" He studied her face, no recognition in his eyes. I am Eleanor Blackwood from Philadelphia. She waited for the dawn of understanding. It came slowly, his brow furrowing before his eyes widened. Miss Blackwood, you're here already? Yes, she smiled tentatively. I received your letter confirming our arrangement. I came as soon as I could. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, certainly, but also something else Eleanor couldn't quite name. Discomfort, perhaps. Then his gaze drifted to her partially covered face, to the scarred skin visible along her jawline, and his expression changed completely. Miss Blackwood, He cleared his throat, glancing around as if searching for a way out of the conversation. I wasn't expecting you so soon. Your last letter said any time after September would be suitable, she reminded him gently. It's now the middle of October. Yes, of course, he nodded, still seeming disoriented by her presence. His eyes travelled over her, taking in her simple dress, her worn valise, lingering on the silk scarf and the visible scarring that even it couldn't completely hide. His expression hardened slightly. You didn't mention your condition in your letters? Heat crept into Eleanor's cheeks. No, I didn't. I should have been more forthcoming. The fire was 5 years ago. It affected the left side of my face and neck, but I assure you it doesn't impact my ability to— Perhaps we should speak somewhere more private, he interrupted, his voice tight. He led her across the street to a small cafe attached to the hotel. Inside, the dimly lit space was mostly empty, with only an older couple seated near the window. Jackson selected a table in the far corner and pulled out a chair for Eleanor with stiff courtesy. Once seated, an uncomfortable silence settled between them. Eleanor folded her hands in her lap to keep them from fidgeting. Coffee? Jackson finally asked. Yes, please. Her mouth was dry with apprehension. He signaled to a waitress, ordered 2 coffees, then turned back to Eleanor. His handsome face was guarded now, so different from the warmth she had imagined behind his written words. Miss Blackwood, he began after the coffee arrived, I believe there's been a misunderstanding. Eleanor's heart sank. What kind of misunderstanding, Mr. Montgomery? Jackson stirred his coffee slowly, not meeting her eyes. In your letters, you described yourself as educated, a school teacher with refined sensibilities. You didn't mention that you were— He paused, searching for words. Disfigured? Eleanor finished for him, her voice quiet but direct. His eyes snapped to hers, surprised by her frankness. I have worked hard to establish my ranch, Miss Blackwood, he continued. It's beginning to prosper. I need a wife who can help maintain my standing in the community. Someone who can— He trailed off. Someone who can what, Mr. Montgomery? Host dinner parties, make a favorable impression on your business associates. There was no bitterness in her tone, only a clear-eyed assessment of what he was trying to say. Appearances matter out here, he said, his voice hardening. A man is judged by the company he keeps, by the family he builds. I need someone who reflects well on my ambitions. The words struck Eleanor like physical blows. She had known coming west was a risk, but she hadn't expected such a clinical assessment of her worth based solely on her appearance. I have other qualities, Mr. Montgomery. I'm well educated. I can keep books for your ranch, teach your children, when they come. Skills I can hire for less than the cost of supporting a wife, he cut in. I'm sorry if this seems cruel, Miss Blackwood, but I must think practically. This territory is still developing. First impressions count for everything. Outside the window, a group of men passed by, laughing loudly. 2 of them glanced inside, their eyes landing on Eleanor and Jackson, their curiosity evident. One nudged the other and whispered something that made them both chuckle. Word travelled fast in small towns, Eleanor realized. Already they knew who she must be, the mail-order bride to marry Jackson Montgomery, and they could see her scarf, perhaps even the scarring it partially concealed. "I've already announced our engagement at Sunday's service," Jackson continued, lowering his voice. "Folks have been congratulating me all week. But under the circumstances, you wish to rescind your proposal," Eleanor stated flatly. "I think it would be best." He at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. "I can provide you with enough money for a return ticket to Philadelphia." Eleanor's fingernails dug into her palms beneath the table. "And what would I return to, Mr. Montgomery? I gave up my teaching position. I sold what little furniture I owned." A flicker of guilt crossed his face, quickly replaced by resolve. "That's not my concern, Miss Blackwood. I made no promises about accepting you regardless of your circumstances." "No, you merely implied it with every letter," she replied, feeling the stares of the other patrons now, the weight of their judgment and curiosity. "What will you tell them?" She nodded toward the window where more townspeople were passing by, some slowing to peek inside. Jackson shifted uncomfortably. "The truth. That there was a misunderstanding. The truth," Eleanor repeated, her voice barely audible. "That I'm too ugly to be worthy of becoming Mrs. Montgomery?" His jaw clenched. "I have a reputation in this town, Miss Blackwood. A standing. I can't appear foolish." "No," she agreed, a strange calm settling over her, despite the humiliation burning in her chest. "Better that I appear foolish instead, the desperate woman who came west with nothing but a valise and misplaced hope." Jackson opened his mouth to reply, but the cafe door swung open and a boisterous group of men entered. Ranch hands by the look of them, dust-covered and loud after a day's work. One of them spotted Jackson and raised a hand in greeting. "Montgomery, there you are." The man approached their table, his smile fading as he sensed the tension. His eyes moved to Eleanor, curious but not unkind. "This, the Philadelphia bride we've been hearing about?" Eleanor stiffened at the description. Jackson stood abruptly. "Not now, Wilson." But Wilson was already extending a hand to Eleanor. "Welcome to Silverwater Creek, ma'am. You sure traveled a long way. When's the wedding?" The cafe had gone quiet, all eyes on their table. Eleanor saw the panic in Jackson's face, the desperation to avoid public embarrassment. "There won't be a wedding," Jackson said tightly. "There's been a misunderstanding." Wilson looked between them, confusion clear on his weathered face. "Misunderstanding? What kind?" "The kind where I expected a bride who could represent my interests. In society, not a woman with—" Jackson snapped, his composure finally breaking under the pressure of public scrutiny. A collective gasp rippled through the cafe. Eleanor sat frozen, the words echoing in her ears. She had endured much in her 27 years. The house fire that had claimed her parents and left her scarred, the whispers that followed her down Philadelphia streets, the pitying glances from former friends, the suitors who disappeared once they saw beneath her veil. But never had she felt so utterly exposed, so completely stripped of dignity. With mechanical precision, she stood, smoothed her dress, and picked up her valise. "Thank you for the coffee, Mr. Montgomery," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I won't trouble you further." Without waiting for a response, she walked out of the cafe, past the staring faces, into the harsh sunlight of a Montana afternoon. Behind her, she could hear the buzz of conversation erupting, Jackson's voice rising defensively. Eleanor didn't look back. She walked down the main street, her mind racing. She had exactly $23 in her pocket, not enough for a room for more than a few nights, certainly not enough for a ticket back east. The sun beat down mercilessly, as if to emphasize the bleakness of her situation. At the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open country, she stopped. Miles of grassland stretched before her, dotted with distant cattle and the occasional homestead. This was the West she had dreamed of. The open possibility of it, now just another cruel reminder of all she couldn't have. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. A wagon rattled past, the driver tipping his hat politely before continuing on. Eleanor watched it disappear down the dusty road, then turned and began walking again, this time away from town. She had no destination in mind, only the blind need to escape the whispers and stares, to find somewhere quiet, to gather her thoughts and form a new plan. The dirt road stretched ahead of her, winding through stands of pine trees already preparing for winter. Every step carried her further from the humiliation in that cafe, but no closer to any real solution. The weight of her situation pressed on her chest, making each breath difficult. She had gambled everything on Jackson Montgomery's promise of a future, and she had lost. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and Eleanor looked up to see storm clouds gathering on the western horizon, moving steadily closer. Perfect, she thought with grim humor, a fitting end to a disastrous day. She should find shelter, she knew. But where? Return to Silverwater Creek and face the humiliation again. Sleep beneath a tree and hope the storm passed quickly, as the first. Fat drops of rain began to fall. Eleanor realized that for the first time in her life, she had no plan, no next step to take. The rain came harder now, soaking through her thin dress. She clutched her valise against her chest, trying to protect the few possessions inside from the downpour. Each step became more difficult as the dirt road turned to mud. The Montana landscape, which had seemed so full of promise from the stagecoach window just hours ago, now felt vast and threatening. The distant mountains had disappeared behind a curtain of rain, and the rolling plains offered no shelter from the intensifying storm. Lightning cracked overhead, followed almost immediately by a deafening clap of thunder. Eleanor quickened her pace, scanning the horizon for any sign of shelter. Through the curtain of rain, she noticed what appeared to be a cabin or outbuilding on a distant hillside. With no better option available, she began moving toward it, each step a battle against the increasingly muddy ground. The storm intensified, wind driving the rain sideways. Eleanor's dress clung to her like a second skin, her hair plastered to her face. Her valise grew heavier, waterlogged, and awkward to carry. The silk scarf that had partially hidden her scars was now soaked through, rendered useless as concealment. As she drew closer, she could see that the structure was indeed a cabin, old but solid-looking, set back among a stand of pine trees. Smoke rose from the chimney despite the late autumn season. Someone was home. Eleanor hesitated at the edge of the property. She had no desire to face more rejection today, but the storm left her little choice. She would ask only for temporary shelter until the worst of the weather passed. Surely no one would be heartless enough to refuse such a basic kindness. With that thin hope clutched tight, she made her way to the cabin door, each step taking her further from the life she had planned and closer to whatever waited ahead, be it shelter from the storm or yet another door closed in her face. The rain hammered against Eleanor's shoulders as she approached the weathered cabin door. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the structure in harsh white light before plunging it back into the grey shroud of the storm. Her fingers, numb with cold, rapped against the wooden door. No answer. She knocked again, louder this time, desperate to be heard over the howling wind and pounding rain. The door swung open suddenly, revealing a tall figure silhouetted against the warm glow from inside. For a moment neither spoke, Eleanor from shock at the appearance of the man before her, and he, perhaps, from surprise at finding a bedraggled woman on his doorstep in the middle of a storm. He was imposing, well, over 6 feet tall with broad shoulders and the lean, hard build of a man who lived by physical prowess. But what caught and held Eleanor's attention was his face. A jagged scar ran from his right temple down across his eye to his jawline, pulling the corner of his mouth into a permanent slight grimace. The eye itself was clouded, clearly blind, in stark contrast to the piercing intensity of his left. "State your business," he said, his voice deep and rough, as if seldom used. Eleanor became acutely aware of her own appearance, soaked to the skin, her scarf clinging uselessly to her neck, the burn scars on her face fully exposed. "I apologize for the intrusion," she managed, her teeth chattering from cold. "The storm caught me on the road. I'm seeking shelter until it passes." The man studied her with his good eye, his expression unreadable. For a long moment Eleanor thought he might turn her away. Then wordlessly he stepped aside, opening the door wider in silent invitation. Relief flooding through her, Eleanor stepped into the cabin. The sudden absence of rain was disorienting. Warmth enveloped her, emanating from a stone fireplace on the far wall. The interior was spare but surprisingly tidy. A table with 2 chairs, a cooking area, shelves lined with books and supplies, and a bed in the corner partially concealed by a hanging blanket. "Thank you," she said, standing awkwardly just inside. The door, water pooling around her feet on the wooden floor. The man closed the door against the storm and moved to the fireplace, where he added another log to the flames without speaking. The firelight cast his scarred face in sharp relief, the shadows emphasizing the rugged contours. "Nathan Blackburn," he finally said, turning to face her. No handshake was offered, but his tone, while gruff, wasn't unkind. "Eleanor Blackwood," she replied, instinctively reaching to adjust the scarf that normally hid her scars before remembering its sodden uselessness. Her hand dropped away, and she forced herself to meet his gaze directly, chin raised slightly in defiance of whatever judgment might come. If Nathan noticed her scars, he gave no indication. His single good eye assessed her with practical concern, rather than curiosity or disgust. "You'll catch your death in those wet clothes," he observed matter-of-factly. He crossed to a trunk at the foot of his bed and rummaged through it, eventually, extracting a flannel shirt and trousers far too large for her frame. "Not ideal, but they're dry. There's a screen in the corner. Change, I'll make coffee." He turned his back, granting her privacy as he moved to the small stove. Eleanor stood momentarily stunned by the mundane practicality of his response. No questions about her appearance, no curious stares, just the simple acknowledgement that wet clothes were dangerous in the Montana autumn. Behind the screen, she peeled off her soaked dress with difficulty. The man's clothes were comically large, but blessedly dry and surprisingly soft from years of washing. She rolled up the sleeves and pant legs, then tied a length of rope he'd included around her waist to keep the trousers from falling down. When she emerged, Nathan was pouring steaming coffee into 2 tin cups. He gestured to a chair by the fire without looking up. "Sit, warm yourself." Eleanor obeyed, grateful for the simple commands that required no decisions from her. The fire's heat began to thaw her frozen limbs, sending painful tingles through her fingers and toes. Nathan handed her a cup of coffee, then hung her dress and scarf on pegs near the fire to dry. "Thank you," she said again, wrapping her fingers around the warm cup. "I won't impose longer than necessary. Once the storm passes—" "Storm set in for the night," he interrupted, settling into the chair opposite hers. "These autumn squalls don't blow over quick." The implication hung in the air between them. She would need to stay the night. I understand if that's not possible," Eleanor said quickly. "Perhaps there's a shed or stable where I could—" "You'll stay here," Nathan stated as if the matter were settled. "I'll sleep by the fire." Eleanor studied him over the rim of her coffee cup. Up close, his scar was even more dramatic, a pale, jagged line that spoke of a wound that should have killed him. The damaged eye was milky, unseeing, while the other was a startling blue that missed nothing. "May I ask how far we are from Silverwater Creek?" she inquired, seeking neutral conversation. 4 miles southeast," he replied. "Nothing else for 20 miles in any direction." He took a sip of his coffee, studying her with quiet intensity. "What brings a woman alone to these parts, walking the roads during storm season?" The question was asked without judgment, a simple request for information. Still, Eleanor hesitated. The humiliation of Jackson Montgomery's rejection was still raw, the wound too fresh to expose to a stranger. "My arrangements fell through," she said finally, the understatement almost laughable in its inadequacy. Nathan nodded once, accepting a vague explanation without pressing further. "Happens out here. Plans don't always hold." The simple acknowledgement, free from pity or curiosity, loosened something in Eleanor's chest. This scarred, taciturn man had offered her shelter, clothes, and coffee without once staring at her burns or asking uncomfortable questions. "Are you a rancher, Mr. Blackburn?" she asked, glancing around the cabin for clues to his livelihood. A ghost of a smile pulled at the undamaged corner of his mouth. "No, ma'am. I track things. People mostly." Eleanor's eyes widened slightly as understanding dawned. "You're a bounty hunter." He inclined his head in confirmation. "When the territorial marshal needs someone found, I'm the one he sends for." Now certain details of the cabin came into sharper focus. The rifle mounted by the door, the heavy pistol on the small table near his bed, the wanted posters partially visible on a side table, the trail-worn saddle and gear in the corner. "That sounds dangerous," she ventured. Nathan shrugged. "Less dangerous than trusting strangers." His good eye fixed on her with surprising gentleness. "Or traveling alone during storm season." Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks at the subtle reprimand. "I didn't plan to be traveling alone, Mr. Blackburn. As I said, my arrangements changed unexpectedly." "Nathan," he corrected. "Out here, formality just wastes breath." A silence fell between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the persistent drumming of rain on the cabin roof. Eleanor felt herself relaxing, incrementally, the warmth and relative safety allowing exhaustion to creep in around the edges of her awareness. "You should rest," Nathan observed, noting her drooping eyelids. "Take the bed. I've slept on worse than a floor." "I couldn't possibly—" "You'll take the bed," he repeated, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. "Dawn comes early. Best to sleep while you can." Too tired to argue, Eleanor nodded gratefully. As she settled onto the surprisingly comfortable bed, separated from the main room by only a hanging blanket, she heard Nathan moving quietly around the cabin, securing doors and windows against the storm. The last thing she remembered before sleep claimed her was the peculiar sense of safety she felt in this stranger's home. A scarred man who had looked at her scarred face and seen only a person in need of shelter from the storm. Eleanor woke to the smell of coffee and wood smoke. For a moment, she stared at the unfamiliar ceiling, disoriented by her surroundings. Then the memories of the previous day crashed over her. Jackson Montgomery's rejection, the storm, Nathan Blackburn's unexpected hospitality. Sunlight streamed through the small window, painting golden patterns on the rough wooden floor. The storm had passed, leaving behind a crisp autumn morning. Eleanor could hear movement in the main room, the soft clink of cookware, the crackle of the fire being stoked. She rose quietly, smoothing her hair as best she could without a mirror. Her dress and scarf hung on a peg near the bed, now dry, though badly wrinkled. She changed quickly, leaving the borrowed clothes folded neatly on the edge of the bed. When she emerged from behind the hanging blanket, Nathan was at the stove, his back to her. Despite his size, he moved with surprising grace, his actions economical and precise. "Good morning," she said softly. He turned, nodding once in acknowledgement. "Coffee's hot. Breakfast soon." His speech was as economical as his movements. "No wasted words. Thank you for everything." Eleanor moved to the small table where 2 tin cups waited. "I'm afraid I've been a terrible imposition." Nathan poured coffee for them both, then returned to tending a skillet of something that smelled deliciously like bacon. "No imposition. Storm would have killed you." The blunt assessment made Eleanor wince, though she couldn't deny its accuracy. Without his shelter, she might well have perished in the Montana wilderness. Still, your kindness was unexpected and appreciated. She took a sip of the strong coffee, wondering what this day would bring. The immediate crisis of shelter had been resolved, but her larger predicament remained. She had nowhere to go, limited funds and no prospects. Nathan set a plate before her, bacon, beans, and a thick slice of bread. He took the seat opposite with his own plate, and they ate in companionable silence for several minutes. Eleanor found herself studying her host with growing curiosity. In daylight, his scar seemed even more pronounced, a vivid testament to some past violence. Yet there was nothing frightening about Nathan Blackburn, despite his imposing physical presence. If anything, there was a steadiness to him that Eleanor found oddly comforting. "You've a decision to make," he said suddenly, breaking the silence. "Silverwater Creek's not far, but after yesterday—" He left the sentence unfinished. Eleanor set down her fork, appetite suddenly diminished, despite the first real meal she'd had in days. "You know what happened in town?" It wasn't a question, but Nathan answered anyway. "Word travels. Small towns." He wiped his mouth with a napkin, his expression unreadable. "Montgomery's a fool." The simple verdict, delivered without pity, drew a startled laugh from Eleanor. "Yes, I suppose he is," she sighed, sobering. "Though, from his perspective, I was less than forthcoming about my appearance." Nathan's good eye met hers directly. "Man invites a woman across the country. He takes her as she is." He gestured to his own scarred face. "Appearances change. Character doesn't." Eleanor felt an unexpected warmth bloom in her chest at his words. "That's a rather enlightened view, Mr. Blackburn." "Nathan," he shrugged. "Seen enough to know what matters." He rose, collecting their empty plates. "So, your decision?" "I have $23 to my name," Eleanor admitted. "Not enough for a ticket back east, and there's nothing to return to anyway. I need to find work." Nathan nodded thoughtfully. "Options are limited for women here. Saloon work or laundry, mostly." Eleanor's heart sank. She had been a school teacher, educated at one of Philadelphia's finest women's seminaries. The thought of serving drinks to rowdy miners or spending her days over steaming wash basins was disheartening, but necessity trumped pride. "I'm not afraid of hard work," she said firmly. "Didn't figure you for afraid of much," Nathan replied, and Eleanor was surprised to detect a note of approval in his tone. He moved to a desk in the corner, rummaging through some papers. "There's a third option, if you're interested." He returned with a folded newspaper. "Territorial Marshal's office in Helena is looking for someone who can read, write, and keep records straight. Pays decent. Room provided." Eleanor accepted. The newspaper, scanning the advertisement with growing interest. "Helena, that's what 100 miles from here?" 76, Nathan corrected. "I ride there twice monthly with reports." He hesitated, then added, "Heading there tomorrow, in fact." Hope flickered to life in Eleanor's chest. "You would take me with you? If that's your decision." Eleanor considered her options carefully. Return to Silverwater Creek and face the gossip and humiliation. Strike out alone for some other frontier town where her prospects might be equally limited, or accept this unexpected opportunity, a chance at respectable employment in a place where no one knew her history. "I would be most grateful for the escort to Helena," she said finally, "if it's truly no trouble." Nathan nodded once, matter settled. "We'll leave at first light. Journey takes 3 days with good weather." Eleanor's mind raced with practical concerns. "I should repay you for your hospitality. I could help with chores today, perhaps." A ghost of a smile touched the undamaged corner of Nathan's mouth. Cabin could use a woman's touch. Been a while. With that, he collected his hat and rifle. "Need to check my trap lines. Back by midday." After Nathan departed, Eleanor surveyed the cabin with a critical eye. It was tidy, but clearly maintained by someone who focused on function over comfort. The shelves needed organizing, the floor a thorough sweeping. The sleeping area could benefit from better arrangement. She rolled up her sleeves and set to work, grateful for the purpose that physical labor provided. She found cleaning supplies in a small pantry: lye soap, beeswax, vinegar, rags and brushes. Starting with the main room, she cleaned methodically, taking care not to disturb the placement of Nathan's possessions while removing months of accumulated dust. As she worked, she took note of the books on his shelves, volumes on tracking, hunting and wilderness survival, but also law books, regional histories, and surprisingly, several well-worn novels by Dickens and Hawthorne. Not the library of an uneducated bounty hunter, certainly. By midday, she had transformed the cabin. The floors gleamed from scrubbing, the windows sparkled, allowing more light to fill the space. She had rearranged his sleeping area for better efficiency, organized his cooking implements, and even found time to prepare a stew from dried meat and vegetables stored in his root cellar. When Nathan returned, he paused in the doorway, surveying the changes with evident surprise. "You've been busy?" he observed, hanging his hat by the door. His eyes took in the gleaming surfaces, the organized shelves, the simmering pot on the stove. "I hope you don't mind," Eleanor replied. "I wanted to repay your kindness somehow." Nathan moved further into the cabin, touching a book that now stood, neatly aligned with its companions. "Don't mind." He glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. "Been a long time since this place felt like more than somewhere to sleep." The simple admission touched Eleanor unexpectedly. She understood what he meant, the difference between a house and a home, a distinction she had recognized the moment she stepped inside his cabin. For all its simple furnishings, the small dwelling felt lived in, cared for. "I made stew," she said, changing the subject. "I hope that's acceptable." They ate at the small table, the conversation sparse, but not uncomfortable. Eleanor found herself growing accustomed to Nathan's economy of speech, recognizing that his silences weren't hostile, but contemplative. As she cleared their plates, a question that had been nagging at her finally found voice. "May I ask what happened?" She gestured vaguely toward his scarred face. "Unless it's too painful to discuss." Nathan was quiet for so long that Eleanor thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured, as if choosing his words with care. 6 years ago, tracking a man wanted for killing a family near Fort Benton, found him holed up in an abandoned mine. He touched his scar absently. "He had a knife I didn't see. I had a gun he didn't expect." His expression remained impassive. "I lived. He didn't." The stark simplicity of the tale made it all the more powerful. Eleanor could fill in the blanks. The struggle in darkness, the searing pain of the blade, the desperate fight for survival. "I'm sorry," she said softly. Nathan shrugged. "Changed how people look at me, made the job harder in some ways, easier in others." His good eye met hers with sudden intensity. "Guess you'd understand that part." Eleanor's hand instinctively rose to touch the scarred side of her face. "Yes," she admitted. "People see the scars first. Sometimes only the scars." "Fire?" Nathan asked, his tone gentle despite the directness of the question. "Yes, 5 years ago. Our house in Philadelphia." She swallowed hard against the memory. "My parents didn't survive. I was pulled out by a neighbor, but not before." She gestured to her face, neck, and left shoulder, where the scarring continued beneath her dress. Nathan nodded, understanding in his gaze. No pity, no morbid curiosity, just the recognition of shared experience, the knowledge of how a single moment can permanently alter one's path. "Explains why you answered Montgomery's advertisement," he observed. "Philadelphia has too many memories." And too many mirrors, Eleanor added with a sad smile. Out here, I thought perhaps what I could do might matter more than how I looked. It should, Nathan said simply. Will in Helena. Marshall Wilson's a fair man, judges by ability, not appearance. As evening approached, they prepared for the journey ahead, Nathan outlining the route and what Eleanor should expect on the trail. Their conversation flowed more easily now, the shared confidences having bridged some invisible gap between them. Later, as Eleanor settled onto the bed for her last night in the cabin, she reflected on the strange turn her life had taken. Just 2 days ago, she had been full of hope for a future with Jackson Montgomery. Now she was preparing to travel to Helena with a scarred bounty hunter, pursuing a position she had never imagined for herself. The future remained uncertain, but for the first time since stepping off the stagecoach in Silverwater Creek, Eleanor felt something close to optimism. Tomorrow would bring a new journey, new challenges, but also new possibilities, a chance to be valued for her abilities rather than judged for her appearance. Through the hanging blanket that separated the sleeping area from the main room, she could hear Nathan moving quietly, banking the fire for the night. There was comfort in his presence, in his straightforward acceptance of her as she was. Whether that comfort would last beyond their journey to Helena remained to be seen, but for tonight it was enough. Dawn broke clear and cold on the horizon, as Eleanor secured her valise to Nathan's sturdy bay gelding. Her breath formed small clouds in the autumn air, while Nathan made final preparations for their journey. He moved with quiet efficiency, checking straps and supplies with the practiced ease of a man accustomed to life on the trail. "The horse's name is Rogue," Nathan said, patting the animal's muscled neck. "He's steady, but keep your heels down and your seat firm. Montana trails don't forgive careless riders." Eleanor nodded, suppressing a flutter of anxiety. She had ridden in Philadelphia's parks occasionally, but those gentle mounts bore little resemblance to the powerful Western horse before her. "I've arranged a riding skirt from your dress," she said, gesturing to her modified garment. She had spent the previous evening cleverly altering her dress with Nathan's sewing kit, creating a practical split skirt that would allow her to ride astride. "I hope it will suffice." Nathan glanced at her handwork with approval. Practical. Good. He helped her mount, his hands strong and sure as he boosted her into the saddle. He then swung up behind her in one fluid motion, his body warm against her back. Eleanor stiffened momentarily at the unexpected proximity. In Philadelphia, such close contact with a man would have been scandalous, but frontier necessities trumped Eastern proprieties. Nathan, for his part, maintained a respectful distance while still ensuring she was secure. "Ready?" he asked, his deep voice close to her ear. "Yes," she replied, steeling herself for the journey ahead. They set off as the sun crested the mountains, the trail leading through stands of pine and aspen trees ablaze with autumn color. The landscape opened before them, majestic mountains in the distance, rolling hills, and valleys that seemed to stretch forever. Despite her circumstances, Eleanor found herself entranced by the wild beauty of Montana territory. "It's magnificent," she breathed, taking in the panorama. Nathan agreed, a man of few words, even in the face of such splendor. They rode in companionable silence for several hours, Nathan occasionally pointing out landmarks or offering brief observations about the terrain. Eleanor gradually relaxed into the rhythm of the horse's movement, finding unexpected pleasure in the journey despite her initial trepidation. By midday, they reached a small stream where Nathan suggested they rest. He helped her dismount, his hands lingering at her waist only as long as necessary to ensure her stability. "You ride well," he observed, unloading some provisions from his saddlebags. "Quick learner." "Thank you." Eleanor stretched her legs, feeling Muscles she rarely used protest the morning's activity. "Though I suspect I'll be quite sore tomorrow." Nathan handed her a strip of dried meat and a biscuit. "First day's always the hardest. Body adjusts." They ate their simple meal beside the stream, the only sounds the gurgle of water over stones and the occasional call of birds overhead. Eleanor found herself studying Nathan when he wasn't looking. The way sunlight played across his scarred features, the alertness in his good eye that seemed to miss nothing, the capable hands that moved with surprising gentleness when the task required. "How long have you been a bounty hunter?" she asked, breaking their comfortable silence. 8 years, he replied. "Before that, Army Scout. Before that, too young to matter." Eleanor smiled at his succinct biography. "And you prefer this life? The solitude?" Nathan considered the question longer than she expected. "Wasn't always solitary. Had a partner once, Marcus Taylor. Good man." Something flickered across his face, an old grief carefully contained. "Died hunting the same man who gave me this." He touched his scar briefly. "I'm sorry," Eleanor said softly. Nathan nodded once, accepting her sympathy without comment. Solitude simpler after that, fewer complications. Eleanor understood complications all too well. After the fire, relationships had become a minefield of pity, revulsion, or forced politeness. Solitude had often seemed the easier path. "What about you?" Nathan asked, surprising her with the reciprocal question. "Teaching suited you." "I loved it," Eleanor admitted. "Helping young minds discover the world. There's nothing quite like it." She sighed, remembering the classroom in Philadelphia she had left behind. "But after the fire, the school board became concerned about my appearance. Said it might frighten the younger children." "Frighten?" Nathan's brow furrowed. "Or make their parents uncomfortable?" "The latter, I suspect," Eleanor replied, touched by his insight. "Adults are far more troubled by differences than children are. The children merely asked questions, then accepted the answers and moved on." "People fear what they don't understand," Nathan observed. "Easier to look away than look closer." The simple truth of his words resonated within her. For most of her life after the fire, people had looked at her and seen only the scars, never the woman beneath. Jackson Montgomery certainly had. Yet Nathan Blackburn, a man whose life had been defined by violence and pursuit, somehow saw beyond the surface with greater clarity than most. They finished their meal and continued their journey, the trail now winding through a narrow canyon. Nathan grew more alert, his posture tensing slightly as they entered the confined space. "Problem?" Eleanor asked, sensing the change in him. "Canyon's a natural ambush point," he explained. "Bandits sometimes target travelers here." Eleanor's heart quickened. "Are we in danger?" "Not likely," Nathan reassured her. "Most know better than to trouble me." There was no boast in his tone, merely a statement of fact. "Still, stay alert." They proceeded cautiously, the canyon walls rising steeply on either side. Eleanor found herself scanning the ridgelines, imagining dangers lurking behind every boulder. The tension was palpable until they emerged into an open valley 20 minutes later. "See?" Nathan said, some of the rigidity leaving his posture. "Uneventful is good." No sooner had the words left his mouth than the crack of a rifle shot echoed through the valley. Rogue sidestepped nervously as Nathan's arm clamped around Eleanor's waist, pulling her low against the horse's neck. "Hold tight," he commanded, spurring the gelding into a gallop toward a cluster of boulders 100 yards ahead. Eleanor clung to the saddle horn, her heart pounding as another shot kicked up dirt near Rogue's hooves. Nathan guided the horse, with his knees, his right hand now holding his pistol, while his left kept Eleanor secure. They reached the boulders, and Nathan dismounted in one fluid motion, pulling Eleanor down beside him. "Stay low," he ordered, positioning himself between her and the direction of the shots. "Who's shooting at us?" Eleanor gasped, trying to keep her panic at bay. 3 riders, ridge to the east. Nathan's voice was calm, methodical. Not bandits, too well dressed. He peered around the boulder, then ducked back as another bullet struck stone, sending fragments flying. "Montgomery," he said flatly. "Jackson." Eleanor's blood ran cold. "But why would he? Man like that doesn't accept being made a fool of," Nathan replied. "You walking away, finding another arrangement, wounds his pride." His expression darkened. "And he might have heard where you're headed. Position with the marshal would put you in society circles. His circles." Another shot ricocheted. Off the rocks, closer this time. Nathan's good eye narrowed as he calculated distances and angles. "Stay here," he instructed. "I need to flank them." "You can't go out there," Eleanor protested. "You'll be shot." A grim smile touched Nathan's lips. Been shot before. Didn't take. Before. She could argue further. He slipped away, moving with surprising stealth for a man of his size. Eleanor pressed herself against the boulder, feeling utterly helpless as silence descended on the valley. The waiting was excruciating, each second stretching into what felt like hours. Then gunfire erupted again, not aimed at her position this time, but from somewhere to the north. 3 shots in rapid succession, followed by shouting. A horse whinnied in distress. More shots, then silence once more. Eleanor held her breath, straining to hear any indication of what had happened. Had Nathan been hit? Were Montgomery's men approaching? Should she try to flee? Suddenly she heard footsteps approaching from behind. Eleanor grabbed a rock, the only weapon at hand, and turned to face whatever came. "Just me," Nathan's voice reached her before she could see him. He appeared around the boulder, a bleeding gash across his upper arm, but otherwise unharmed. "They're gone." "You're hurt," Eleanor said, dropping the rock and rising to examine his wound. "Graze," he dismissed. "Had worse shaving." Despite his nonchalance, he allowed her to inspect the injury. "Did you kill them?" she asked hesitantly. Nathan shook his head. "Shot to warn, not to kill. Hit one in the shoulder, they ran." He met her concerned gaze. Montgomery wasn't among them. Hired guns. Eleanor's hands trembled as she tore a strip from her petticoat to bind Nathan's arm. "I never imagined he would go to such lengths. Men like Montgomery don't accept defeat gracefully," Nathan said, wincing slightly as she secured the makeshift bandage, "especially from those they consider beneath them." The implication was clear. As long as Jackson Montgomery felt his pride wounded, Eleanor might be in danger. The position in Helena, which had seemed a perfect solution just hours ago, now appeared fraught with risk. "Perhaps Helena isn't wise after all," she said quietly. "If he has connections there." Nathan studied her face, his expression thoughtful. "Alternative is hiding, living in fear." His good eye held hers steadily. "Not much of a life." Eleanor straightened her shoulders, determination replacing fear. "No, you're right. I won't let him dictate my choices any more than he already has." A flicker of approval crossed Nathan's features. "Good. We'll be more cautious. Take a different route." He checked his pistol, reloading the spent chambers. "And I'll teach you to shoot. Woman should know how to defend herself out here." The matter-of-fact offer touched Eleanor deeply. Not protection based on her weakness, but empowerment based on her strength. It was a distinction few men in her experience understood. They continued their journey, now following game trails and less traveled paths. Nathan remained vigilant, his senses attuned to any hint of pursuit. By nightfall, they had covered less ground than planned, but had successfully evaded any further confrontation. Nathan selected a campsite in a small clearing ringed by dense pines, providing natural protection and concealment. As he built a small, smokeless fire, Eleanor marveled at his wilderness skills, his ability to read the land, to move through it like a shadow when needed, to extract sustenance and shelter from seemingly meager surroundings. "We'll reach Miller's trading post by tomorrow evening," he informed her, as they shared a simple meal of jerky and hardtack. "Friend owns it. Safe place to rest properly." Eleanor nodded, exhaustion from the day's events beginning to take its toll. The adrenaline of the ambush had long since faded, leaving her drained and increasingly aware of her aching muscles. Nathan noticed her fatigue. "Sleep," he said, gesturing to the bedroll he had prepared for her near the fire. "I'll keep." "What? You need rest too," she protested. "Used to going without," he assured her. "Sleep now, miles to cover tomorrow." Too tired to argue, Eleanor settled onto the bedroll, surprised by its relative comfort. As she drifted towards sleep, the last thing she saw was Nathan's silhouette. Against the star-filled sky, a guardian figure whose scarred visage now represented safety rather than fear. The day's events had changed something between them. A shared danger, creating an unexpected bond. Eleanor fell asleep, wondering what tomorrow would bring, and why the thought of reaching Helena and parting ways with Nathan Blackburn suddenly seemed less appealing than it had just this morning. Miller's trading post appeared on the horizon. In late the following afternoon, a collection of sturdy log buildings nestled in a small valley where two creeks converged. Smoke curled from stone chimneys, and the windows glowed amber in the fading light. After a day of vigilant travel through rough country, the sight of civilization, however modest, was welcome. Eleanor shifted in the saddle, her muscles protesting after nearly 2 full days of riding. Nathan's solid presence behind her had become familiar, almost comforting, his occasional directions the only break in their companionable silence. They had spotted no further signs of pursuit, but Nathan had remained cautious, choosing less traveled routes that added miles to their journey, but provided greater security. "Samuel Miller owns this place," Nathan explained as they approached. "Former trapper, good man, trustworthy." "Will he mind my presence?" Eleanor asked hesitantly. The memory of Jackson Montgomery's rejection remained raw, making her wary. Of new introductions, Nathan's voice was firm. "Sam judges people by their actions, not their scars. Helped me when others wouldn't after this." He touched his cheek briefly. "You'll find no judgment here." The trading post's yard bustled with activity, even as evening approached. Trappers trading pelts, a wagon being unloaded of supplies, 2 Native American men conversing with what appeared to be the proprietor. At Nathan and Eleanor's arrival, the large bearded man broke off his conversation and strode toward them, a broad smile splitting his face. "Blackburn, you old devil," he called, "beginning to think you'd found better company than mine." Nathan dismounted in one fluid motion, then helped Eleanor down with gentle hands at her waist. "Sam," he greeted, clasping the man's extended hand. "Been a while." Samuel Miller stood nearly as tall as Nathan, with a barrel chest and arms that spoke of a lifetime of physical labor. His beard was shot through with gray, but his eyes were sharp and assessing as they moved from Nathan to Eleanor. "And who might this be?" he asked, his curiosity evident but not unkind. "Eleanor Blackwood," Nathan replied, traveling to Helena for the marshal's office position. "Eleanor, Samuel Miller." Eleanor extended her hand, fighting the urge to adjust. Her scarf as Miller's gaze fell upon her scarred features. "A pleasure, Mr. Miller." The big man enveloped her hand in both of his. "Any friend of Nathan's is welcome here, Miss Blackwood." His eyes reflected no pity or revulsion, only a straightforward warmth that immediately set her at ease. "You both look like you could use a hot meal and proper rest. Come inside." The trading post's main building served multiple purposes: store, tavern, and gathering place for travelers and locals alike. A massive stone fireplace dominated one wall, its heat a blessing after the chill of the trail. Miller led them to a table in a quiet corner, away from the curious glances of other patrons. "Rachel!" he called, and a young woman appeared from what Eleanor presumed was the kitchen. "2 plates of stew, fresh bread and coffee for my friends here." The girl, perhaps 16, with Miller's same warm eyes, nodded and disappeared again. Eleanor noticed Nathan watching the girl with a strange expression. "She's grown," he observed quietly to Miller. The older man nodded, his face softening, 3 inches this year alone, becoming the image of her mother. A shadow crossed his features. "She asks about you sometimes. Wonders why you don't visit more often." Nathan's gaze dropped to the table. "Been busy. Tracking work doesn't leave much time for social calls." Miller snorted. "That's horse apples, and you know it. You've been hiding in that cabin of yours, letting that scar become an excuse to shut out the world." He glanced at Eleanor, then back to Nathan. "Though it seems you might be breaking that habit finally." Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks at the implication. "Mr. Blackburn is merely escorting me to Helena," she clarified. "A professional arrangement." "Is that so?" Miller's eyes twinkled with amusement. "Well, professional or not, it's good to see this one in company again." He clapped Nathan on the shoulder. "I'll let you two eat in peace. Room's ready upstairs when you need it." "Just the one, I'm afraid. Place is full with trappers coming down from the high country." After Miller departed, an awkward silence fell between them. The implication of sharing a room hung in the air, unaddressed but impossible to ignore. "I can sleep in the stable," Nathan offered, breaking the tension. "Wouldn't be the first time." "Don't be ridiculous," Eleanor replied with more confidence than she felt. "After everything you've done for me, I won't have you sleeping with horses on my account. The room will be fine. I'm sure we can arrange things appropriately." Nathan studied her face, then nodded once. "As you wish." Rachel returned with their food. Steaming bowls of venison stew, fresh-baked bread still warm from the oven, and strong black coffee. The simple meal was the most delicious thing Eleanor had tasted in days, and they ate in appreciative silence. As they finished, Eleanor noticed a man enter the trading post, his appearance causing a subtle shift in the room's atmosphere. He was expensively dressed for the frontier. Tailored coat, polished boots, a gold watch chain gleaming in the firelight. Something about his confident stride and the deference others showed him reminded her uncomfortably of Jackson Montgomery. Nathan had noticed him too, his posture tensing almost imperceptibly. "William Hargrove," he murmured, his voice too low for anyone but Eleanor to hear. "Owns half the mining claims between here and Helena. Man with that much money usually has secrets. Worth keeping?" "You know him?" Eleanor asked quietly. "Know of him," Nathan corrected. "Never had cause to cross paths officially." Something in his tone suggested there was more to the story. Hargrove conducted his business with Miller, then turned to survey the room. His gaze paused on their table, recognition flickering in his eyes as he noticed Nathan. After a moment's hesitation, he approached, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Blackburn," he greeted with forced cordiality, "unusual to see you in civilized company." "Hargrove," Nathan replied, his expression neutral but alert. "Business bringing you to Miller's?" "Supply negotiations for my newest mine." Hargrove's attention shifted to Eleanor, his eyes widening slightly as he registered her scarred features before smoothly masking his reaction. "I don't believe I've had the pleasure, Miss Blackwood," Eleanor supplied, immediately on guard. "Eleanor Blackwood. William Hargrove, at your service." He executed a small bow. "A new arrival to our territory, I take it?" "Miss Blackwood is traveling to Helena," Nathan said before she could answer, "for a position with Marshal Wilson's office." Something calculating flashed in Hargrove's eyes. "Is that so? How interesting." He turned back to Eleanor. "The Marshal is an old friend. Perhaps I could put in a good word for you." "That's very kind, but unnecessary," Eleanor replied. "I prefer to secure positions based on my qualifications." Hargrove smiled thinly. "Admirable sentiment. Still, connections matter in Helena. Should you change your mind?" He produced a calling card, placing it on the table between them. "My home is always open to friends of the Marshal's office." With another slight bow, he departed, leaving an unsettled feeling in his wake. Nathan watched him go, his expression difficult to read. "You don't trust him," Eleanor observed when Hargrove was out of earshot. "Trust is earned," Nathan replied. "Hargrove's reputation is complicated. Made his fortune quickly, some say too quickly. Rumors about claim jumping, miners disappearing. But nothing proven? Nothing that would stand in court." Nathan's voice held a note of frustration. "Men like that are careful to keep their hands clean while others do their dirty work." Eleanor considered this. "And now he's offering me his friendship because of a position I don't even have yet." "Information is valuable," Nathan said. "Marshall's office sees reports from across the territory. Someone on the inside would be useful to a man with interests to protect." The implication was clear. Hargrove's apparent courtesy masked opportunism. Eleanor felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. The position in Helena, which had seemed her salvation, was becoming increasingly complicated. "Perhaps this job isn't what I thought," she said quietly. Or perhaps Hargrove sensed a threat in someone he couldn't immediately control, Nathan countered. "Marshall Wilson is an honest man. He'd expect the same from those who work for him." Their conversation was interrupted by Rachel's return. "Pa says your room is ready whenever you want it," she informed them, her young face curious as she looked between them. "It's the last one on the right, top of the stairs." "Thank you," Eleanor smiled at the girl. After Rachel departed, Nathan pushed back from the table. "Should check on Rogue," he said. "Make sure he's properly settled for the night." Eleanor nodded, understanding his need for movement after the intensity of their conversation. "I'll wait for you here." Left alone, she surveyed the trading post's main room. The other patrons paid her little attention now, absorbed in their own conversations and card games. Hargrove had departed, leaving only the regular crowd of trappers, traders, and local farmers seeking companionship after lonely days in the wilderness. Miller approached her table, sliding into the seat Nathan had vacated. "Hope the stew was to your liking, Miss Blackwood." "It was wonderful," she assured him. "Thank you for your hospitality." Miller studied her with keen eyes that missed little. "Known Nathan Blackburn for 7 years now," he said conversationally. "Best tracker in the territory, honest to a fault, loyal to the bone." "He's been very kind to me," Eleanor acknowledged, wondering where this was leading. Kind isn't a word most associate with him, not since the accident. Miller stroked his beard thoughtfully. "Keeps to himself, does his job, doesn't let people unclose." Eleanor remained silent, sensing Miller had more to say. "Thing is," the older man continued, "I've never seen him bring anyone here before. Man or woman always travels alone." His eyes held hers steadily. "Makes me wonder what's different about you." Heat rose in Eleanor's cheeks. "As I said, Mr. Miller, it's merely a professional arrangement. Mr. Blackburn is escorting me to Helena." "As a courtesy," Miller smiled knowingly. "Nathan Blackburn doesn't do anything out of mere courtesy, Miss Blackwood. Not anymore." He rose from the table. "Just something to consider during your journey." As Miller walked away, Eleanor was left with unsettling thoughts. Was there truth to his implications? Had Nathan's assistance been motivated by something more than simple kindness to a stranger? And if so, what did that mean for their inevitable parting when they reached Helena? More troubling still was her own reaction to these possibilities. Not discomfort or apprehension, but a small, warm spark of hope that she dared not examine too closely. The oil lamp cast dancing shadows across the small room as Eleanor unpacked her few belongings. The accommodations were simple but clean: a narrow bed, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, a small table with a mirror that Eleanor deliberately turned to face the wall. After days on the trail, even these modest comforts seemed luxurious. A soft knock announced Nathan's return. Eleanor opened the door to find him standing awkwardly in the hallway, his tall frame seeming too large for the confined space. "Rogue is settled," he reported. "Miller's stable boy knows his business." Eleanor stepped aside, inviting him in. Nathan hesitated briefly before entering, his gaze sweeping the room with the automatic assessment of a man accustomed to evaluating his surroundings for threats. "I've been thinking," Eleanor said, closing the door. "You should take the bed. Your arm needs proper rest to heal. The wound from yesterday's ambush, while not serious, clearly pained him more than he would admit." Nathan shook his head. "Floor's fine. Slept on worse." "I insist," Eleanor pressed. "You've done so much for me. It's the least I can offer in return." A standoff ensued, neither willing to concede. Finally, Nathan offered a compromise. "Bed's wide enough for two if we're careful. I'll stay on top of the blankets. You underneath. Proper that way." The suggestion brought warmth to Eleanor's cheeks, but she recognized the practicality of it. "Very well," she agreed, "though I warn you, my aunt always said I steal blankets in my sleep." The hint of a smile touched Nathan's scarred face. Been warned. With arrangements settled, they prepared for rest. Eleanor used the washstand to refresh herself, then changed into her nightgown behind a makeshift screen created from a blanket. Nathan removed only his boots and coat, keeping his pistol within reach beside the bed. The awkwardness Eleanor had anticipated as they settled onto the narrow mattress, her beneath the covers, him atop them, was present but not overwhelming. They lay side by side, careful not to touch, the silence broken only by the muffled sounds of the trading post below and the occasional creak of the timber frame. "Nathan," Eleanor said softly after several minutes, "may I ask you something?" The non-committal sound served as permission. "Miller seemed surprised to see you with company. He implied you've been isolated since your injury." Nathan was quiet so long, Eleanor thought he might not answer. "Not much for company these days," he finally said. "People stare, ask questions, or worse, don't ask but wonder. Simpler alone." The simple admission echoed Eleanor's own experience so closely that a lump formed in her throat. "Yes," she whispered, "simpler, but lonelier." "Used to it," he replied, though something in his tone suggested otherwise. "I thought I was too," Eleanor admitted. "After the fire, people changed around me. Friends became strangers. Suitors disappeared. Even my aunt, who took me in, couldn't quite look at me directly." She swallowed hard against painful memories. "I learned to expect rejection." "Like Montgomery," Nathan observed. "Like Montgomery," she agreed, though his rejection seemed especially cruel after the hope his letters had created. Nathan shifted slightly beside her. "Man's a fool." The blunt assessment drew a surprised laugh from Eleanor. "Yes, I suppose he is." She turned her head to find Nathan watching her, his expression softened by the dim light. "But his rejection led me to your cabin, so perhaps I should thank him." Something flickered in Nathan's good eye, a warmth that made Eleanor's pulse quicken. For a moment, she thought he might reach for her, but instead he returned his gaze to the ceiling. "Get some sleep," he said gruffly. "Long ride tomorrow." Eleanor closed her eyes, but sleep proved elusive. Nathan's presence beside her, the warmth of him, the faint scent of leather and wood smoke that clung to his clothes, was distractingly intimate. What Miller had implied echoed in her mind. What was different about her that had broken through Nathan's self-imposed isolation? And more troubling, what would happen when they reached Helena and parted ways? Morning arrived with pale, sunlight filtering through the small window. Eleanor woke to find herself alone in the bed, Nathan already up and dressed, his back to her as he examined something on the small table. "Good morning," she said, sitting up and smoothing her sleep-tousled hair. Nathan turned, quickly tucking whatever he'd been studying into his pocket. "Morning." Miller's serving breakfast downstairs when you're ready." Eleanor gathered her things and used the washstand to prepare for the day, then changed behind the makeshift screen. When she emerged, Nathan was gazing out the window, his expression troubled. "Is something wrong?" she asked. He hesitated, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded paper. "This was slipped under our door during the night." He handed it to her. Eleanor unfolded the note, written in an elegant hand on quality paper. "Miss Blackwood, a mutual acquaintance has offered a substantial reward for information regarding your whereabouts. I decline to provide such information, but others may not be so discreet. Exercise caution on the Helena Road. A friend." Eleanor's blood ran cold. "Jackson," she whispered. "He's still looking for me." Nathan nodded grimly. "Man's persistent, and now he's offering money." But who would leave this warning? Miller? No. Nathan's jaw tightened. Hargrove's hand recognized it from territorial documents. Eleanor frowned, confused. "Why would he warn us if he's as untrustworthy as you say?" "Man like that plays multiple angles," Nathan explained. "Warning us puts us in his debt, creates obligation. Useful if you take that marshal's office position." The calculation behind such a gesture made Eleanor's skin crawl. "So we're caught between Montgomery's vindictiveness and Hargrove's manipulation." "Seems so." Nathan moved to the door. "Best get moving. Different route to Helena now. Longer, but safer." Downstairs, the trading post was already bustling with morning activity. Miller greeted them warmly, though his eyes narrowed at Nathan's tense posture. "Trouble?" he asked quietly, as he served them plates of eggs and bacon. Nathan glanced around. To ensure they weren't overheard, Montgomery's put a bounty out, information on Eleanor's whereabouts. Miller cursed under his breath. "Man doesn't take rejection well." "We're changing route," Nathan continued. "North Pass instead of the main road." The older man frowned. "North Pass is rough country this time of year. First snow's already dusting the higher elevations. Rather face snow than Montgomery's hired." "Guns." Miller nodded reluctantly. "I'll pack extra provisions for you, no charge," he added when Nathan began to protest. "Consider it an investment in seeing you both safely to Helena." As they ate, Eleanor noticed Rachel watching them from behind. The counter, her young face curious. When their eyes met, the girl approached their table with determined steps. "Pa says you're taking the North Pass," she said without preamble. "You'll need warmer clothes, miss. I have a spare coat and gloves you can borrow." Before Eleanor could respond, Rachel disappeared, returning moments later with a bundle. "Here," she offered, pushing the items across the table. "The coat's a bit big, but it's lined with rabbit fur. Warmest one I've got." Touched by the unexpected kindness, Eleanor accepted the gift. "Thank you, Rachel. That's very thoughtful." The girl shrugged, suddenly shy. "Mr. Blackburn helped Pa when our wagon broke down in a blizzard 2 winters back. Carried me 3 miles through snow up to his waist when my feet got too cold to walk." Her gaze flickered to Nathan, who was studiously focused on his breakfast. "Just returning the favor." As Rachel retreated, Eleanor turned to Nathan with newfound appreciation. "You never mentioned that." "Nothing to mention," he muttered, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. "Anyone would have done the same, but anyone didn't," Eleanor observed softly. "You did." Nathan rose abruptly. "Should check our supplies. Meet me at the stable when you're ready." After he departed, Miller slid into the vacant seat. "That man," he said with fond exasperation, "would rather face a grizzly bear than accept gratitude." "He doesn't seem to believe he deserves it," Eleanor replied. Miller's expression grew serious. After what happened with Marcus, Nathan took more than physical scars. Blamed himself, though it wasn't his fault. Some wounds don't heal clean. His partner, Eleanor recalled. He mentioned him briefly. More than partners, brothers in all but blood. Miller stroked his beard thoughtfully. Nathan was different then. Smiled more, talked more. The man you see now is just a shadow of who he was. Eleanor absorbed this, piecing together the fragments of Nathan's past. The man who scarred him, who killed Marcus. What happened to him? Nathan tracked him for weeks through the worst winter in memory. Found him holed up in a mining camp near the Canadian border. Miller's eyes grew distant with the memory. Brought him back alive when no one would have questioned bringing back a body. Said the law should decide, not him. Man hanged 3 days later. Justice, not vengeance, Eleanor murmured. Exactly. Miller fixed her with a penetrating gaze. That's the measure of the man you're traveling with, Miss Blackwood. Remember that when you reach Helena and decide what comes next. The implication was clear. Miller believed there might be more between them than a journey to Helena. The thought both thrilled and terrified Eleanor. How could she consider such possibilities when her own future remained so uncertain? Outside, the day had dawned clear and cold. The sky, a brilliant blue canvas, stretched over the mountain peaks. Eleanor found Nathan at the stable, methodically checking their supplies and Rogue's tack. He acknowledged her arrival with a nod, his expression unreadable. Miller says the North Pass will add a day to our journey, he informed her. Weather holds, we'll reach Helena day after tomorrow. Eleanor adjusted Rachel's borrowed coat, grateful for its warmth against the morning. Chill. I trust your judgment on the route. Nathan paused in his preparations, studying her with unexpected intensity. This changes things, he said finally. Montgomery putting money on information makes traveling more dangerous. Might be safer if we separate in Helena. No public connection between us. The suggestion, logical from a security standpoint, sent an unexpected pang through Eleanor's chest. Is that what you want? What I want, Nathan began, then stopped, struggling with words that didn't come easily. What I want doesn't matter. Your safety does. Eleanor stepped closer, emboldened by the vulnerability she sensed beneath his stoic exterior. It matters to me, she said softly. What you want matters to me. For a breathless moment, something shifted in Nathan's scarred face, a lowering of defenses, a glimpse of the man Miller had described, the man who existed before pain and loss had reshaped him. Then, like a shuttered lantern, it was gone, replaced by his customary reserve. Should go, he said, turning back to Rogue. Daylight's burning. As Nathan helped her mount, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary, Eleanor knew with sudden clarity that reaching Helena would bring a reckoning neither of them was quite prepared to face. Not just with Montgomery's threats or Hargrove's schemes, but with the unexpected bond forming between two scarred souls who had found in each other a rare understanding. The North Pass awaited, its challenges merely a prelude to the more complex terrain of Heart's Long, closed by pain, but now, perhaps, beginning to open once more. The terrain grew steadily more challenging as they left Miller's trading post behind. Within hours, the well-traveled road gave way to a narrow trail that wound upward through increasingly dense pine forest. The air grew sharper, carrying the clean scent of snow from higher elevations. Eleanor was grateful for Rachel's fur-lined coat as the temperature dropped with each passing mile. Nathan rode in silence, his focus divided between the trail ahead and constant vigilance for signs of pursuit. The warmth of their shared night had been replaced by a watchful tension that left little room for conversation. Eleanor understood the necessity but found herself missing their earlier exchanges, brief as they had been. By midday, the forest thinned, revealing breathtaking vistas of rugged peaks and valleys spread below them like a painter's masterpiece. Eleanor gasped at the wild beauty of it, momentarily forgetting the discomfort of the journey. "It's magnificent," she breathed. Nathan reined Rogue to a halt, allowing her a moment to appreciate the view. "North Country has its own beauty," he acknowledged. "Harsher than the lowlands, but more honest somehow. Like the people who choose to live here," Eleanor observed, thinking of the contrast between Jackson Montgomery's polished facade and Nathan's straightforward nature. A ghost of a smile touched Nathan's lips. Some, maybe. They continued their ascent, the trail narrowing further as it snaked around granite outcroppings. In places, the path clung precariously to the mountainside, with drops that made Eleanor's stomach lurch. She trusted Nathan's guidance and Rogue's sure-footedness, but couldn't help clutching the saddle horn more tightly in these exposed sections. Almost to the pass, Nathan assured her as the afternoon waned. Cabin on the other side. Trapper's shelter. Not much, but walls and a roof. That sounds heavenly right now, Eleanor admitted, feeling the fatigue of hours in the saddle. As they crested a ridge, the wind struck them with unexpected ferocity, carrying the first stinging pellets of sleet. Nathan frowned at the darkening. Sky to the north. Weather's changing, coming faster than I expected. His voice held concern. Need to push harder. Storm's building. They quickened their pace as much as the treacherous trail allowed. Eleanor could feel Rogue's muscles bunching. With greater effort beneath them, the sleet intensified, driven by strengthening wind that seemed determined to push them from the narrow path. Hold tight, Nathan instructed as visibility deteriorated. His arm circled her waist more securely, anchoring her against him as Rogue navigated a particularly exposed section. The temperature plummeted as daylight faded. Snow began to mix with the sleet, at first sporadically, then in earnest. Eleanor's face stung with the impact of ice crystals, and her fingers grew numb despite her gloves. She huddled against Nathan's chest, grateful for his solid warmth at her back. There, he said suddenly, pointing through the swirling white. The cabin! Eleanor squinted into the storm, barely making out a dark shape nestled against the mountainside ahead. Relief washed through her as they approached the small log structure, its sturdy construction promising shelter from the worsening conditions. Nathan dismounted first, then lifted Eleanor down with strong hands. Her legs trembled from cold and hours of riding. He steadied her with a concerned look. Inside, he directed, I'll see to Rogue. The cabin door creaked open to reveal a single room, spartanly furnished but mercifully intact. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a small table, 2 chairs, and a narrow cot comprising the only furniture. Clearly, the trapper valued function over comfort. Eleanor's fingers were too numb to manage the small tinderbox she found on the mantel, but she gathered kindling from a supply stacked beside the fireplace. By the time Nathan entered, stamping snow from his boots, she had arranged everything for a fire. Rogue's sheltered in the lean-to, he reported, shaking snow from his coat. Not ideal, but he's had worse. He knelt beside the fireplace, his practiced hands quickly coaxing flames from the kindling. As warmth slowly filled the cabin, Eleanor removed her gloves and coat, moving closer to the growing fire. That was closer than I'd like, she admitted, extending her hands toward the flames. I've never seen weather change so quickly. Mountain storms are unpredictable, Nathan replied, adding larger logs to the fire, especially this time of year. He studied her with concern. You're shivering. I'll be fine, she assured him, though her teeth chattered traitorously. Just need to warm up. Nathan rummaged in his saddlebags, extracting a flask. Not much for drinking, he said, offering it to her, but this will help. Eleanor accepted the flask hesitantly, taking a small sip. The whiskey burned a fiery path down her throat, spreading warmth through her chest. She coughed slightly, unused to such potent spirits, but took another sip before returning it. Thank you, she said, feeling warmth begin to return to her extremities. Not just for the whiskey, but for getting us here safely. I'm beginning to think there's nothing you can't navigate through. A shadow crossed Nathan's scarred features. Some things can't be navigated, only endured. The stark honesty of the statement hung between them as Nathan busied himself with unpacking their provisions. Eleanor sensed he was speaking of more than mountain storms, of grief perhaps, or the aftermath of violence that had left its mark on his face and soul. They shared a simple meal of jerky, hard cheese, and biscuits from Miller's. Supplies. The howling wind and occasional creaking of the cabin's timbers made conversation difficult, but the silence between them had shifted from the tense vigilance of the trail to something more companionable. As they finished eating, Nathan moved to check the cabin's perimeter, ensuring all was secure against the storm's assault. Eleanor took the opportunity to study him without being observed. The fluid grace of his movements, despite his imposing size, the watchful alertness that never quite left him, the careful way he handled even simple tasks, as if mindful of his own strength. "Should hold through the night," he announced, returning to the fire. "Storm might delay us, but we're safe enough here." "What about Montgomery's men?" Eleanor asked. "Could they have followed us?" Nathan shook his head. "Not through this pass, not in this weather. Even experienced guides would turn back." He settled into one of the chairs, stretching his long legs toward the fire. "We're alone up here." The simple statement carried unexpected weight. Alone, far from civilization, sheltered from pursuit. For the first time since meeting, they had a moment of true privacy, with no imminent dangers or interruptions. The realization brought a flutter of awareness that Eleanor tried to dismiss. "You should take the cot," Nathan said, nodding toward the narrow bed. "I'll manage by the fire." Eleanor glanced at the small cot, then back to Nathan's large frame. The arrangement at Miller's, sharing the bed with propriety maintained, had been surprisingly comfortable. More than that, it had felt right in a way she couldn't quite articulate. "It's too cold for you to sleep on the floor," she countered. "We managed well enough last night." Nathan's good eyes studied her carefully. "This is different," he said quietly. "No one nearby. No protections." Understanding dawned. He wasn't concerned about his comfort, but about her reputation, her safety. Even more, perhaps he was concerned about his own control, his own feelings. "I trust you, Nathan," she said simply. Something flickered in his expression. Gratitude, perhaps, or something deeper. "Trust's a rare thing," he observed, "not to be given lightly." "I don't give it lightly," she assured him. "But you've earned it in every way that matters." The fire popped and hissed, sending sparks up the chimney as the wind moaned around the cabin's eaves. Outside, the world was a maelstrom of white fury, but inside this small shelter, something fragile and precious was taking shape between two people who had learned to expect rejection rather than acceptance. "If you're certain," Nathan finally said, his voice rough with emotion he rarely displayed. "I am." Later, as they lay side by side on the narrow cot, Eleanor beneath the blankets, Nathan atop them as before, the intimacy of their situation was impossible to ignore. The cabin's single room offered no privacy, no separation. The howling storm outside only emphasized their isolation, their dependence on each other. "Nathan," Eleanor whispered into the darkness, the fire having burned down to glowing embers. "What happens when we reach Helena?" The question had haunted her since Miller's trading post, growing more insistent with each mile that brought them closer to their destination and to their parting. Nathan was silent so long she thought he might have fallen asleep. Finally, his deep voice came softly through the darkness. "What do you want to happen?" The simple question caught Eleanor off guard. What did she want? The position at the marshal's office had been a lifeline when she had nothing else, but now there was Nathan, a man who saw beyond her scars, who treated her with respect born not of pity, but of genuine regard. "I want," she began, then faltered, fear of rejection surfacing despite everything. "I want not to say goodbye," she finished honestly. "Nathan," shifted beside her, turning to face her in the dim light. His scarred face was a study in shadows, but his good eye held an intensity that made her breath catch. "Been alone a long time," he said quietly. "Thought it was better that way, safer." His hand moved hesitantly, coming to rest atop hers over the blanket. Not so sure anymore. The simple touch, the vulnerable admission, from a man who had built walls around himself after unimaginable loss, moved Eleanor profoundly. She turned her hand beneath his, lacing their fingers together. "I understand solitude," she whispered. "After the fire, it seemed easier than facing the stares, the pity, the revulsion. But easier isn't always better." "No," Nathan agreed. "It isn't." The confession hung between them, neither quite ready to define what might follow. Eleanor was acutely aware of their circumstances, alone in a remote cabin, days from civilization, their futures uncertain. Any declarations now would be colored by these extraordinary conditions. "Helena first," Nathan said, as if reading her thoughts. "See you settled, safe." His fingers tightened on hers. "Then we talk about what comes next." The promise in those simple words warmed Eleanor more thoroughly than the fire ever could. They might not have answers yet, but they had possibility. And after years of doors closing in her face, an open door ahead felt miraculous. "I'd like that," she whispered. Nathan's thumb brushed softly across her knuckles, the gesture surprisingly tender from hands accustomed to tracking criminals and surviving wilderness. "Sleep now," he murmured. "Storm's got hours yet to run." Eleanor closed her eyes, lulled by the rhythm of Nathan's breathing beside her and the continuous symphony of the storm outside. For the first time since leaving Philadelphia, her dreams were not haunted by uncertainty or fear, but filled instead with images of snow-covered mountains, crackling fires, and a man whose scars matched her own, not just those visible on skin, but the deeper ones etched on the soul. Morning would bring new challenges, but for now, in this moment suspended between past and future, Eleanor Blackwood found herself exactly where she needed to be. Helena appeared on the horizon as the afternoon sun broke through lingering clouds. After the storm had subsided, they had made good time, descending from the mountains into rolling foothills blanketed with pines. The territorial capital sprawled across a valley, its buildings more substantial than the frontier structures of Silverwater Creek. Brick and stone intermixed with wooden facades, church spires and government buildings rising above the miners, cabins that had birthed the settlement. Eleanor felt Nathan tense behind her as they approached the outskirts of town. The easy companionship they had shared since the cabin was gradually replaced by a wary vigilance. They were returning to civilization, and to all its complications. "Marshall's office is on Main Street," Nathan informed her, guiding Rogue down a side road rather than the main thoroughfare. "But we'll approach carefully. Montgomery might have men watching." They skirted the busier sections of town, keeping to quieter streets until they reached a modest boarding house several blocks from the center of Helena. "Sarah Donovan owns this place," Nathan explained as they dismounted. "Widow, trustworthy. You'll be safe here while we sort things out." Before Eleanor could respond, the door opened to reveal a sturdy woman in her 50s, grey hair pulled back in a practical bun, sharp eyes taking in the scene before her. "Nathan Blackburn," she greeted, hands on hips. "Been nearly a year since." "You darkened my door." "Sarah," he nodded respectfully, "need a room." Discreetly. Mrs. Donovan's gaze shifted to Eleanor, noting her scarred features without comment. "For the lady, I presume?" "She has business with Marshall Wilson. Needs safe lodging until it's settled." The older woman's eyes narrowed shrewdly. "Trouble following?" "Possibly," Nathan admitted. "Well then," Mrs. Donovan stepped aside, gesturing. "Id them in. Better come inside before you're spotted. Helena's walls have eyes, especially when there's money involved." The boarding house was immaculately maintained, with polished floors and simple but quality furnishings. Mrs. Donovan led them to a small parlor at the rear of the house, away from windows facing the street. "Now," she said once they were seated, "what sort of mess are you bringing to my doorstep, Nathan Blackburn?" Nathan provided a concise account of their situation: Eleanor's rejection by Montgomery, the bounty for information, and her prospective position at the marshal's office. Throughout his explanation, Mrs. Donovan listened attentively, her expression giving nothing away. "Jackson Montgomery," she said when he finished, "banking family from back east, owns the largest cattle operation in the territory now." Her mouth tightened with disapproval. "Man thinks his money puts him above common decency." "You know him?" Eleanor asked. "Know of him. His type is common enough in Helena these days. New money trying to build empires." She turned to Eleanor with unexpected gentleness. "You're well rid of him, dear, though I'm sorry for what you endured." "Thank you," Eleanor said, touched by the woman's straightforward kindness. Mrs. Donovan rose decisively. "Room at the back of the house. Private entrance if needed. No one will know you're here unless I tell them." She fixed Nathan with a pointed look. "And you? Where will you be staying?" The question hung in the air, laden with implications. After their nights together, at the cabin especially, returning to separation felt like a step backward. Yet, propriety demanded it, particularly now that they had reached civilization. "Got business with the marshal," Nathan replied, sidestepping the question. "Need to report on my last assignment anyway." "And after that?" Mrs. Donovan pressed. Nathan's gaze met Eleanor's briefly. "Depends on a few things." The widow looked between them, understanding dawning in her shrewd eyes. "I see." A hint of a smile softened her features. "Well, my door's open when you need it, Nathan Blackburn. Always has been." After showing Eleanor to her room, a cozy space with a comfortable bed, washstand, and small writing desk, Mrs. Donovan departed to prepare tea, leaving Eleanor and Nathan alone for the first time since their arrival. "Will you go to the marshal now?" Eleanor asked, removing Rachel's borrowed coat. Nathan nodded. "Need to know if Montgomery's made his grievances official. Marshal Wilson should be informed of the situation before you meet him." The practical considerations made sense, but Eleanor sensed Nathan was creating distance, preparing her, perhaps, for their inevitable separation. Despite their conversation in the cabin, the reality of Helena had introduced new uncertainties. "And then?" she asked quietly. Nathan moved to the window, checking the alley behind the boarding house with habitual caution before answering. "Depends what the marshal says. If Montgomery's been making accusations, you think he might have spread lies about me?" The possibility hadn't occurred to Eleanor before. Man like that, wounded pride. Nathan shrugged. Wouldn't put it past him. The thought was troubling. Eleanor had pinned her hopes on the marshal's office position, seeing it as her chance for independence in this new territory. If Montgomery had poisoned that well too... "I'll come back when I know more," Nathan promised, moving toward the door. He paused, turning back with uncharacteristic hesitation. "Eleanor, whatever happens with the marshal, you have options. Remember that." Before she could ask what he meant, he was gone, his footsteps fading down the hallway. Mrs. Donovan returned, moments later with tea and sandwiches, her expression sympathetic. "Men," she said, setting down the tray, "never say what they mean, especially when it matters most." Eleanor smiled despite her worry. "You seem to know Nathan well." "Known him since before his injury," the widow confirmed. "Different man then, lighter somehow. The scars changed how others saw him, and eventually how he saw himself." She poured tea with practiced grace. "Until now, perhaps." "What do you mean?" Mrs. Donovan's eyes twinkled. 20 years running this boarding house, I've seen every kind of arrangement between men and women, business, convenience, necessity. She handed Eleanor a cup. What I saw between you and Nathan Blackburn wasn't any of those. Heat rose in Eleanor's cheeks. We barely know each other. Sometimes a week tells you more than a lifetime, the widow replied sagely, especially when that week includes danger, hardship, and having nowhere to hide. She patted Eleanor's hand. Rest now. Things will look clearer after you've had tea and a proper wash. The simple comforts of civilization, hot tea, clean water, soft bedding, were indeed restorative. Eleanor bathed, changed into her cleanest dress, and was just arranging her hair when a firm knock came at her door. Nathan stood in the hallway, his expression unreadable. Marshal Wilson wants to see you, now. The territorial marshal's office occupied a solid stone building on Helena's main street. Eleanor followed Nathan through a side entrance, her anxiety mounting with each step. What if Montgomery had indeed turned the marshal against her before she'd even arrived? Marshal James Wilson was not what Eleanor expected. Instead of the grizzled frontiersman she had imagined, she found a trim, silver-haired gentleman with intelligent eyes and an air of quiet authority. He rose from behind his desk as they entered, studying her with frank assessment. Miss Blackwood, he greeted, offering his hand without hesitation or distaste at her scarred features. Nathan's told me about your situation. Please sit down. As Eleanor took the offered chair, Wilson returned to his desk, steepling his fingers thoughtfully. I received a letter from Jackson Montgomery 3 days ago, he began without preamble. Quite concerned about a dangerous, unstable woman traveling in the company of Nathan Blackburn. Eleanor's heart sank. I see. I've known Nathan for 7 years, the marshal continued. Man of few words, but those words are always true, so I'm inclined to believe his account over Montgomery's. His piercing gaze met hers. Still, I need to hear your side directly. With growing confidence, Eleanor recounted her journey west, Montgomery's cruel rejection, and the events that had led her to Helena. She omitted nothing, including Montgomery's men attacking them on the trail and the warning at Miller's trading post. When she finished, Wilson nodded thoughtfully. Matches Nathan's report. He leaned back in his chair. Montgomery's a powerful man in this territory, Miss Blackwood, has the ear of the governor himself. I understand if the position is no longer available, Eleanor said quietly. I wouldn't want to cause difficulties for your office. To her surprise, the marshal smiled. Miss Blackwood, if I worried about causing Jackson Montgomery difficulties, I wouldn't be doing my job. He opened a drawer, withdrawing a folder. Position's still yours if you want it. Territory needs people with backbone, especially in this office. Relief washed over Eleanor. Thank you, Marshal. I won't disappoint. You see that you don't. Wilson's tone was firm but not unkind. Pay's not grand, but the room above the office comes with the position. You can move in tomorrow. He glanced at Nathan, who had remained standing silently by the door. Assuming that arrangement still suits you. The question, ostensibly professional, carried undercurrents that made Eleanor flush. She looked to Nathan, uncertain how to respond. Actually, Nathan said, stepping forward, I have an alternative proposal. Wilson raised an eyebrow. Do you now? Miss Blackwood's skills would be wasted on mere clerical work, Nathan continued, his voice steadier than Eleanor had ever heard it. She was a teacher back east, educated, reads and writes better than most in the territory. I'm aware of her qualifications, Wilson replied, a hint of amusement in his tone. The territorial school needs a teacher, Nathan pressed on. Position's been empty since Miss Gardner left to marry last spring. Eleanor's eyes widened. A teaching position? Here in Helena? The possibility had never occurred to her, yet it aligned perfectly with her training and passion. Nathan, she began, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of his suggestion, already spoke to the school board chairman, he cut in, addressing both her and the marshal. "Man owes me a favor, said they'd consider her application favorably." His good eye met Eleanor's. "If that's what she wants." Wilson chuckled softly. "Well, Miss Blackwood, is that what you want?" Eleanor's mind raced. Teaching again. Doing what she loved, what she was trained for, rather than filing reports and keeping ledgers. The opportunity seemed too perfect. To be real, Yes, she admitted. But why? Nathan shifted uncomfortably under her gaze. "Deserve work that suits you," he said simply. The marshal cleared his throat. "Think I'll give you two a moment." He rose, moving toward the door. "Miss Blackwood, whatever you decide, teaching or the clerk position, there's a place for you in Helena." With a knowing nod to Nathan, he departed, closing the door behind him. Alone with Nathan, Eleanor found herself at a loss for words. The bounty hunter who had rescued her from the storm, protected her on the trail, and now arranged a teaching position in Helena, stood before her, his scarred face betraying unusual vulnerability. "Why did you do this?" she asked softly. Nathan took a step closer. "Told you in the cabin we'd talk about what comes next when you were settled." His voice grew rougher with emotion. "Want you to have choices, real ones, not just what circumstance forces on you. And if my choice is to stay near you?" The boldness of her question surprised even Eleanor, but after everything they'd shared, pretense seemed pointless. Something like hope flickered in Nathan's good eye. "Been thinking about that," he admitted. "My cabin's too far out for teaching. In Helena, but there's land closer to town, good piece with a creek running through it." Eleanor's heart quickened. "You'd move your home. For me?" "For us," he corrected quietly. "If that's what you want." Time seemed suspended as the full implication of his words registered. Not just employment, not just safety, but a future together. A life built on mutual respect and understanding rather than convenience or necessity. "Nathan Blackburn," Eleanor said, stepping closer to him, "are you asking me to marry you?" A rare, full smile transformed his scarred face. "Doing a poor job of it, seems like." "On the contrary," Eleanor replied, her own smile breaking through. "I think you're doing just fine." In the marshal's office in Helena, two people who had been rejected for their scars, one visible, one buried beneath years of isolation, found in each other not just acceptance but celebration of who they truly were. As Nathan's hand closed gently around Eleanor's, the future opened before them, not without challenges but faced together with clear eyes and open hearts. Jackson Montgomery had rejected Eleanor Blackwood for being too ugly to stand beside him. But Nathan Blackburn, a man whose own scars had taught him to see beyond surface appearances, recognized the true beauty of her courage, resilience, and spirit, and in doing so, rediscovered his own capacity for connection. Some journeys begin, with rejection only to end in finding precisely where and with whom we truly belong. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.